All right, welcome to Intro Methods. Now in this video, we're going to talk about how to just create some simple methods. Now what a method is basically it is you setting aside some code that you can use anytime you want. I'm going to just erase a couple of things that I've got here. There we go. Now, so in this particular project, I just called it Intro Methods. You can go ahead and put a date or whatever you want when you make your project. And I've got one method here. Now, it starts off with public, static, and this particular method is a void. And I called it print. So let me explain what each of these is in turn. The first one is public. It means that anything can access this. The two things this can be is public or private. If it's public, anything can access it. If it's private, only things within this class, within this file, can access it. Now, more likely than not, most things will tend to be public. When you get into more advanced programs, that's when you start making things private. Because there's a benefit to making things public. Everything can access it. You don't have to worry about, giving this information to this thing or giving this information to this thing. Public, they can just access it. Now, if you make it private, only things within this area can access it. And the negative, the benefit is everything can access it, but the negative is everything can access it. Sometimes you don't want people accessing this particular variable or this particular method in this case. Now the static, a little bit harder to explain, but the dumbed down version is if you have a public static void main, and you're calling a method in that main, then basically everything's got to be static. Whenever I'm in the main file, right? Then every method you have has to be static. If I take this static away, it'll give you this error here. Non-static method print cannot be referenced from a static context. It's just saying that, this is static, so everything else has to be too. It's one of those oddities in programming where everything has to match, kind of. If I take this static away, it goes away, but then my program's going to crash when I try to run it. So, because the main has to be static. And since the main is static, all the methods here also have to be static. Now, void, what this means is what kind of data this thing gives back. Now, void gives nothing back. It's useful for when you're printing things, in this case, fuzzy pickles. If I wanted to get information back, then it wouldn't be such a good thing. I'd want it to be something like an int or something along the lines of that. Maybe a double, depending, or a string. So this right here can be really anything we want. Void means returns nothing. This is useful, let's say, if you're playing a game that displays the map. That's all it does. You hit the button, it displays a map. You hit exit, the map goes away. You don't need any information. You just display. Poof, there it is. Press escape, it goes away. That would be a good thing for a method. Let me back that up some. There we go. Now, if I run this code in particular, it's going to, well, let me comment this out here first before we get to it. There we go. That'll be better. I'm just going to run print here. You can write all this down here in a minute, but this should come up here. Find print. If I click on it, you'll see it highlights, and it matches. Print is going to print, fuzzy pickles. It'll do whatever code is in between these braces. And notice that I said end print here because that's the end of that method there. Now a method has to be up here. It cannot be declared inside the main. I can call it in the main, and that's what this is called. This is called a method call. So I'm basically saying run this. Now if I take this off, nothing happens. I have this method up here, and this is where some people have some issues. They'll see this, and they'll be like, oh, it's going to say fuzzy pickles, and then nothing happens. This is never used unless you tell it to be used. So in this case, I have to physically come down here in the main and say run this, and then it'll run it. In which case, you'll see fuzzy pickles. Now, this right here is fairly simple. You just print whatever is in here. I can have 3 or 4 lines. I can have 1,000 lines. Obviously, just having one line is pretty simple and straightforward, right? But normally a method might have hundreds or thousands of lines. The real power of a method is that I can have 1,000 lines of code in here, and I can make it all run with one word. Print. Just like that. I could have loops and all kinds of other stuff, and all that will execute with just that one word. Now, if I look at another method here, like I said, this right here, this void, it can be an int, it can be a double, it can be a character, it could be a string, it could be an object. If it is one of these, then I have to do a few little adjustments, but we'll see that here in a minute. Now, the second method I got here, public static void display. And notice there's something in parentheses here. Up here, there's nothing. This right here, this line here, is basically what you're going to give it. So in this case, what you give the method. So when I call it, in this case print, I didn't give it anything, right? There's nothing in parentheses, so I didn't put anything in parentheses here. This time I'm asking for a string. So in this case, I made a method called display. You see it highlights. Just like that, it has a little print statement inside. And that print statement will print that variable. Now whatever I give it is what it's going to print. So if I made a variable string in1 equals Bubba, I could run this again, display Bubba. And as long as I'm giving it a string, it doesn't matter if it's in quotes. Well, whoops, in1. Here we go. Ding. As long as it's in quotes, it's a string. So it doesn't matter if it's the variable or if it's quotes. I'll run it and you'll see over 9. The string is over 9,000. The string is Bubba. So I basically have this string here, and I'm going to throw it up. It's going to get plugged into this because display matches this. Display string, display string. Now if I take this off, you'll see it gives me an error. Method in class intro methods can't be applied to given types requires a string. So it has to match exactly whatever I have up here. So in this case, display string, I pass over 9,000. That gets plugged into this variable. So this variable string in is over 9,000. So it's going to print the string is over 9,000. It'll go to the next line. I had this string called Bubba. And down here it displays in1. So basically it's going to put Bubba in here. And then it'll print the string is Bubba. And you'll see it displayed on the screen right here. So that's the simplest form of methods. If I wanted this to be an integer or a double or a character or something like that, then I'd need to do something a little bit different. And usually that is something we would do if there was a little bit of math involved. So public static int. Let's just call it add. Int in1, int in2. Now these variables I have in here can be called kind of anything you want. This can actually be a double. That could be a string. It doesn't have to match. This is one of the issues people have initially. Just because this is an int doesn't mean these have to be as well. Now, more likely than not, they will be, but they don't have to match. Now notice I got an error already. In fact, it says missing return statement. Now if I make this an int, like I've got here, that means once this whole method runs, it's expecting me to give something back. In this case, it's expecting me to give an int back. So if I say int, n1, well, let's go int total equals n1 plus n2, return total. So I'm going to take whatever numbers I give it, add them up, and I'm going to return that answer back. Now, an alternative to writing it the way I did it would just be to say return n1 plus n2. I could save myself a line and do it this way if I wanted. I did it this way because it illustrates it a little better. So I come over here and I say, let's see, add 5, 5. And that should come up here, plug a 5 into this, and plug a 5 into this. Int total equals 5 plus 5, so total is going to be 10, right? And then it's going to return that 10 back to where it was called. Now if we come here, we'll see add 5, 5. That's basically going to become 10. So what's going to appear on my screen? Do you see 10? The answer is obviously no. So what happened? Why didn't it display on the screen? Well, because I didn't tell it to. If you notice up here, I'm telling it to print. I'm telling it to print. Down here, I'm not telling it to do anything. It's just running the method and nothing's happening. Well, stuff is happening, it's just not saving it. So what ends up happening in this case is I pass the 5s up, it does the math, and it throws the 5 back. You can kind of think of it like I'm passing 2 tennis balls back to this, I'm throwing it to this guy. And he's going to throw me a tennis ball with a 10 back on it. So that 2 5s come up, the 10 comes back down here, and this becomes 10, but I'm not doing anything with it. If I want to do something with it, I would need to, catch it somewhere. Or I can just outright print it if I wanted to. Add 10, 10. And then I'll see, that's 20. It will pass the 10 up, pass the 10 up. 10 plus 10 is 20. It'll pass the 20 back, and this basically just becomes 20. So it prints that 20 on the screen. Now I can do this for doubles. I can do strings, characters, booleans, whatever I want, method-wise. I can have multiple lines, 1,000 lines. I can have a method that calls another method. I can come here and just say, well, run print. And that display will print fuzzy pickles every time. So a method can call a method. If you want to get really convoluted, you can make a method call itself. I could have print keep calling itself. And of course, I'm going to break my program if I do that here like this. Basically, I create an infinite loop until the program breaks. Because there is only so much space that can be, used. And I've effectively broken it here. I've gone well beyond the space that's allowed. Every time it runs print, you can think of it kind of nesting in. It runs print, it nests in. Runs print, nests in again. If I do it too many times, then this happens. I'll run out of memory, which is basically what happened here. So this is roughly the gist of methods. They're very, very useful. We're going to be using them for the rest of the class, obviously. We'll see some more practice later, but this is your basic void passing an item and then returning and passing items back and forth, how that kind of works. If you want to do some more practice, try some multiplication instead. There's really only one thing you got to change here. Try passing 2 or 3 things. Mix it up a little bit. Make a couple of different methods and try to do a couple of other things with them. You could have user input inside the method where you type something. You can have user input here and then pass that variable to the method. There's a couple of different ways you can kind of practice and play around with this, but we'll see some more later on.